In general, momentum is this thing that I think runs a lot in our blood. It's the way we like it. We like batsman form mein us pe jao. A company that's doing really well in the stock market, its customers are saying, yaar, aap to bada acha kar rahe ho कि हम आपको और business देते हैं. Sometimes it results also in positivity, in a positive feedback loop as well.
दोस्तों ये वीडियो मैं स्मॉल केस के लिए बना रहा हूं, लेकिन ये बहुत ही अलग सा वीडियो है। मैं अक्सर स्मॉल केस के बारे में बातें करता हूं कि कैसे मेरे स्मॉल केस में बहुत ज्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट है, पर्टिकुलरली विद इन दैट मोमेंटम स्ट्रेटजी में है, विद इन दैट कैपिटल माइंड की मोमेंटम स्ट्रेटजी में है, जो कि एक बहुत ही बढ़िया स्मॉल केस है। एंड अ लॉट ऑफ यू हैव आस्क्ड मी व्हाट इज मोमेंटम स्ट्रेटजी, कैसे काम करता है, क्यों काम करता है, करना चाहिए कि नहीं, बेयर मार्केट में कॉस्ट एसोसिएटेड, सो ऑन। बहुत सारे सवाल जिनके जवाब मेरे पास हैं मेरी समझ के हिसाब से, बट आई एम नॉट एन एक्सपर्ट, सो आई ब्रॉट द एक्सपर्ट इन दीपक एंड अनूप, जो कि कैपिटल माइंड से हैं, एंड दे रन द मोमेंटम स्मॉल केस एज द स्मॉल केस मैनेजर। उनके साथ गुफ्तगू करेंगे 5 questions that I have for them। ये सवाल एक कम्युनिटी पोस्ट से आए थे जो कि मैंने YouTube पे पोस्ट किया था, एंड आई आस्क्ड ऑल ऑफ यू कि अगर आप दीपक और अनूप से कोई सवाल पूछना चाहते हैं तो वो क्या होंगे। वो सारे 200 प्लस सवालों में से 5 जो फ्रीक्वेंटली आस्क्ड क्वेश्चंस थे वो मैंने उनसे पूछे, एंड इट वाज अ वंडरफुल कॉन्वर्सेशन जहां मेरी क्लैरिटी तो बढ़ी ही, होपफुली आपकी भी बढ़ेगी। Thank you so much, Deepak. Thanks a lot, Anoop, for sparing time. I'm so glad that we could get you today for this conversation. As I've mentioned, मैं expert नहीं हूँ, nor do I want to be, and I'm so glad that आप लोग who have built this momentum strategy where a fair bit of my own investments are deployed have chosen to come and speak to my audience about what it is. So thanks so much for joining in today.
Thanks Ankur,
for having us. Pleasure to talk about this.
Superman. Awesome. The first one, and let's get it started on that. I'm reading from my screen, is momentum strategy hoti hi kya hai? So imagine that there is a layperson watching this video. Unko koi idea nahi hai. They have dabbled with stocks. Maybe they've invested in mutual funds, maybe direct stocks. शायद trading भी कभी कभी किया है, futures and options भी किया होगा. तो if you have to explain momentum strategy to somebody जिसको कोई idea नहीं है वो क्या होता है, how would you actually go about doing that?
So there's probably the 5-second answer and the slightly more elaborate one. The 5-second answer is a systematic process that buys stocks showing stronger price momentum than the rest of the market. Now the slightly more nuanced. So maybe I'll just share my screen quickly. So you can't talk about momentum without talking about what is factor investing.
Okay.
This is sort of you could say the umbrella or the super category of what momentum falls under. So to explain what factor investing is, let's think about, thinking about this from first principles, right? So if you had to pick a team of players, so how would you go about doing this objectively? So, you could maybe think about things like ball handling, speed, their height, their reach when they're jumping. Maybe there could be some other things which tell you whether a player can be a good basketball player. So that's kind of the overarching principle of factor investing. So there are 5 conditions that you apply to anything that you use to build an investing strategy. So if something passes all of these, then it sort of becomes a potential factor to build an investment strategy on. So if you look at financial research and history, there's about 6 of these which have fulfilled most of those 5 characteristics. There's value, there's minimum volatility, there's momentum, there's quality, there's size, and there's carry. And these are, these can have different names depending on the context, but these 6 kind of have passed all of those criteria over time. Momentum probably more so than some of the others.
Will it be right to say that these are 6 broad strategies that have stood the test of time when it comes to long-term investing? Okay.
So if you think about, if your objective is to beat the market, these 6 have largely been able to do that over long periods of time.
Got it. And ye by definition, Anoop, will be long-term investing strategies, not necessarily short-term trading strategies.
So it's kind of hard to differentiate between the two, but long-term is something that you can invest in and say, I'm going to keep doing this for X number of years and I expect it to do better than the market. That's what I mean by long term in this context.
Perfect. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you will hold on to a certain stock for the long term.
Correct.
No.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Okay.
So coming to coming to momentum specifically, having spoken about factors, right? So momentum, while it's fairly new in the Indian context, has been around for a fairly long time. There is a lot of research going back, almost 50, 60 years. What does it actually mean? Momentum as a term can mean many different things, right? So I've kind of boiled it down to probably four different things. So momentum investing in four charts, right? So one, it is about picking stocks which have moved up more than the rest of the universe. So you're looking at stocks which have done largely better than the median stock has done. Largely, it is about picking stocks which have moved up more than the rest of the market has, and avoiding those which have done worse than the market has. The second is about, it is never going to enter at the bottom, nor is it ever going to exit at the top. So it's looking for stocks which have done well for a certain period of time, entering them and then sort of riding them till the point that they start to lose that momentum, which means, again, because it relies on some historic price data to actually either enter or exit, it's essentially saying that once it starts to lose momentum is when it's going to exit a stock.
And sorry, if I go back, a fundamental question hai ki you marked the exit, which is on the top right, but what tells you that the exit is not, say, the first trough that you encounter and actually this trough?
You have certain short-term price signals which you look at and say, once the price falls below, let's say, the 50-day moving average, is when typically stocks tend to break down even more. You're trying to minimize your probability of sharp losses or deep losses.
Sure. One quick addition here. Sorry, but this is like why you would say that Virat Kohli is suddenly a bad player after maybe just 2 or 3 bad innings. You'll wait for at least 4 or 5 ना, या 2 or 3 तो कभी भी हो सकता है. फॉर्म में है बंदा, आ जाएगा एक और सेंचुरी मार लेगा. ये तो मतलब 2-3 के बाद थोड़ी निकालोगे.
Got it. Does this also mean कि your definition of losing momentum may be different from some other momentum strategy owner?
Yes, it can be. So okay, you see the x-axis of time, right? So we looked at when something qualifies to be part of momentum. Somebody might look at 1 year in the past to decide what those stocks are. Somebody else might look at 6 months. You could even create a composite metric that looks at 1 year, 6 months, 3 months, and then has like a combined score for what is the return over time. So it really comes down to how someone would implement a momentum strategy.
And that, I would argue, would result in the difference in performance over a period of time.
Yes.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Badhiya, bahut badhiya.
So coming to the importance of volatility. So given 2 stocks which have both done equally well in terms of price return, you're going to prefer the stock that shows lower volatility. Yes. And lastly, and probably the most important thing about momentum, that it's a system, it's a process. So if 4 stocks, A, B, C, and D, enter the momentum portfolio on a given day, it's highly likely 2 of them immediately start to go down once they've come in, and 2 of them continue to sort of go on their way up. So the process of momentum or the system essentially means that you cut short the losses that you get from those stocks which then fail on showing continued momentum. So that's really about how a momentum investing strategy can be implemented. In a nutshell, the chart on the left essentially shows the gray line is the Nifty. The light blue is where you would have implemented what we call a naive momentum strategy, which is picking stocks purely based on their returns, and how that would have done. And then the dark blue line is where we would have adjusted those stocks for their volatility and then said, if you were to do a 30 stock portfolio and rebalance it monthly, how would that do versus the Nifty? You're going to do very well at certain times. You're not going to do as well at certain other times, but you're counting on doing better than the index by staying invested over a long period of time.
Yeah, in the strategy itself.
Yes.
The other sense that I got, and this was leading to the other question, Deepak and Anoop, which is momentum. जब मैं सुनता हूँ, it gives me the flavor of a bull run. But then a bunch of people ask this question, that in a bear market or in a sideways market, is that an advisable time to deploy momentum strategy at all? What are the kind of markets जिसमें momentum strategy अच्छी perform करती है या अच्छी कर सकती है?
See, basically, stocks are correlated, which means it's roughly moving up together and moving down together. In fact, the correlation tends to go up in down markets. Even a sideways or a falling market is not necessarily bad, but there has been some research around how momentum has done over the long term. And this is in this chart here. So if you look at deflation, low inflation, mild overshoot, and high inflation, that pretty much covers every kind of market, which is bear, bull, sideways. Momentum has been fairly consistent in being, reasonably solid across different types of market regimes. That is, again, this is over the long term, which does not mean it's not going to have individual years of significant pain.
I think one more thing here is it's very difficult to predict कि आगे वाला market bear होगा या bull. Because if you, okay, I'll give you an example. 3 months ago, they said, yeah, Russia has attacked Ukraine or something, and wheat, 60% of the world's wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. Wheat ka bhav double ho jayega, triple ho jayega. It did go up, and now it is currently wheat prices in the world are lower than that is, I'm talking 3 months after the war, it's lower than pre-war. You can't predict ki aage wala mahina will be bear market or not. The idea that you could predict that there's a bear market then means you don't need momentum or anything else. You're already paramgyani, at which point you can just get into the market when you know there's a bull market coming. But if you don't, and like we also say we don't, a strategy that has proven itself over the long term has to be given that leeway in a way.
Makes sense. Basically, don't try and time the market क्योंकि वो कोई नहीं कर सकता. And if you're not timing the market, then stay committed to a strategy for long term because that strategy, just like any other strategy, will go through its ups and downs. Like अभी index funds भी नीचे ही है ना, ऐसा तो नहीं है कि किसी ने किसी को बचा लिया है. But
I'll tell you one thing here, Ankur. I don't even say don't try to time the market. अगर आपके लिए वो चलता है ना तो वो भी ठीक है. Momentum is one way, and it's a way that I think identifies with, say, our personality, but I won't say that nothing else works.
Yeah. Now I like that. I also liked how you helped me get into the segue around personality, which is one of the questions that a lot of people asked, and that is कि momentum strategy is something which, at least in India, is new. Who would you reckon should be somebody who considers this as a strategy? Like, is there a persona? Is there a kind of investor who you think will be right for momentum strategy? What are the pitfalls? What are the things that you would do as a small case manager if you could to say कि यार ये 5-6 सवाल मैं पूछना चाहूंगा to kind of determine कि आप ready भी हो कि नहीं?
Sure. So, I mean, question one would be, what is your investment horizon? The other is around what is your overall asset allocation like? Do you have reasonable amount in slightly safer instruments like, say, debt and even FDs for that matter? I know what you're going to say to that, but point being is some of your money in fairly safe avenues. Then you can deploy some of the remaining, whether that is 50%, 60%, 70%. That again comes down to individual personalities. But the last criteria would really be very person specific, which is what is your personality like? What does it take for you to lose sleep about your money or your investments? Right? At the end of the day, you should only pick investments that let you sleep comfortably at night. And if something makes you uncomfortable enough that you're wondering, lying awake, thinking what's going to happen, then it's not right for you. On the other hand, if you're able to sort of, live with that and that doesn't bother you at all, you've got a 10+ year horizon, you know that the market's going to be fluctuating and therefore your portfolio holdings are going to fluctuate, then probably, you kind of fit the bill for somebody who can deploy money into a momentum strategy.
Makes sense. A follow-up question on that is, let's say I'm putting in, pick a number, 60% of my investable quantum into equities, and the rest is in the safer assets as you described. Is it okay/advisable to put all of that 60% in one strategy, say momentum? Is there also a risk profiling within equities? Like we saw 6 different strategies. Do those 6 different strategies also have different risk personas within the equity umbrella?
Definitely not on day one. For anyone who's new to any kind of investing, I would say start small. Just sort of ease into it. Start with an amount that you wouldn't be too bothered with if you saw it fall 20-30%. And as you then spend time, you automatically either gain confidence or you lose confidence depending on what's happening.
So for instance, if you're investing really small amounts of money, like of the order of 10,000 or 15,000 rupees, getting into a strategy that has say 20 stocks in it and requires you to invest in all the 20 or 25, and each stock is maybe 1,000, 2,000 rupees. आप एक भी stock नहीं खरीद पाओगे उसके, and depending it may not be equally allocated. The strategy may say 4% to one stock, 7% on another stock. If you don't have that minimum, then it doesn't even make sense to get in the first place, in the sense of, so until you build a significant corpus enough. Sometimes people like the stories that happen with the stock. If that stuff excites you, then a strategic approach like momentum will not satisfy your needs. But I think there are some people for whom this strategy just works, and it isn't because of the returns. It's because of the discipline and the fact that you follow a consistent strategy throughout that makes the whole thing palatable.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid point, and I'm glad that you raised that, because ये temperament अपने आपके बारे में समझ पाना बहुत जरूरी है. And a lot of people, especially youngsters, like a large part of my audience is 18 to 24, who would be making their first investments and hopefully signing up for a long-term commitment of that. शुरू में ना बहुत मजा आता है. And I so relate to that casino wala feeling. But let me ask a question on the other end of the spectrum. And this is something that I noticed. It also worries me because I'm getting closer to that figure. आपके small case पे the maximum investable is 20 lakhs. Is there like a reason for that?
Yes, the reason primarily is because of the way small case is structured, right? So when you hit rebalance on small case, it prepares a bunch of buy and sell orders and sends them to the market. So with small case, what happens is a lot of people tend to hit rebalance at 9:15 as soon as the market's open. So you've got these deluge of buys happening for certain stocks, which there might not be, the commensurate amount of supply of those stocks at that time, which will drive the price up quite significantly. You will see prices jumping up 4-5% for certain stocks. And the reverse happens for the stocks that are being sold. So that obviously is going to adversely impact your returns if those volumes are seriously huge. So hence the limit on that.
Got it. So this is, it's an improvement area for the product, but not fundamentally for the strategy. The strategy still remains robust in that sense. Would that understanding be right?
Absolutely, and we know this because in our PMS we do, we run a momentum strategy, and we buy larger quantities of stocks that might be transacted through small case, but because we've got a trading desk and there's breaking up the order and placing limit orders through it, different points in the day, when our buys and sells are not moving the market, and we're making sure that we are getting favorable prices whether we're buying or selling. On the cost thing, Ankur, I did want to talk about one more thing. So we talked about portfolio size. If let's say you're subscribing to a small case and paying 10,000 for it, but if you only end up investing 50,000, the strategy now has to return 20% for you to just break even.
Yes.
Right now, the long-term equity average is 11 to 12% per year. So the thumb rule should be that the amount that you plan to invest in a strategy should make the subscription fee roughly 2 to 3% of the amount invested.
Got it. So in other words, if I were to back calculate, ideal investment size over a year should be upwards of 4 lakhs into a momentum strategy if you're looking at a 10,000 fee.
Absolutely. Even if you don't invest it on day one, you at least should have a line of sight to saying, okay, I'm going to get there within a few months for this number to make sense to me.
Yeah, which makes sense. And I'm glad you asked this question, Anoop, क्योंकि बहुत सारे लोगों ने ये सवाल पूछा. एक तो upfront cost है, which is of the small case, and that rightfully should be there because you as small case managers are bringing in that expertise to the retail customer. But then there is weekly rebalancing, तो उसका transaction cost है. There is short-term capital gain जो आपको देना ही पड़ेगा because assuming almost weekly sell या buy हो रहा है, तो वो सबको जोड़कर what would then your revised ideal size be?
So first I'll just clarify on the weekly rebalancing, right? So I wouldn't call it a weekly rebalance. I'd call it a weekly review, where stocks which have been in the portfolio for more than a month are candidates for either exiting or continuing in the portfolio. It is still a monthly rebalance in that sense, which is reviewed weekly. So and there's reasons to that. We've looked at past data about there is something called as rebalance timing luck. So if I were to pick the first trading day of every month and only rebalance on that day, there's a significant element of what is happening in the market on that day, which will impact your returns. So by breaking it up over weekly reviews, we are essentially kind of eliminating the impact of luck on just happening to pick that one day, which might be great or which might be terrible for having done the rebalance. So our rebalance frequency for most stocks is still more than a month. What remains is the STT on the sales and the the short-term capital gains. So short-term capital gains are 15% and long-term is 10%. So if you were to assume, let's say, a gross return of two strategies of 15%, one which is a long-term strategy, which has bought stocks and then is selling them after a year, versus something like a momentum, your effective return for the momentum strategy would be, let's say, 13.2 or 3%, down from the 15 gross you had if you account for taxes and if you account for transaction costs, while your return from the longer term strategy might be about 0.75 to 1% higher. So that is the cost of effective cost of participating in a higher churn strategy like a momentum, and that's going to be there, so therefore a momentum strategy has to beat, let's say, the index by at least 3 to 4% for it to be even comparable. If it's not doing that, if it is only matching the index, you're worse off than the index. That's kind of a known fact about any higher churn strategy like momentum.
Got it. Makes sense. And how long have you guys been running? Because I know that you have your PMS, you have the small case as well, but overall, as Capitalmind, how long have you been running the momentum strategy in India?
Deepak, you want to take this?
Yeah. I think we started off the tests with momentum, and momentum, the first time we kind of quantified the momentum strategy was at demonetization time, where we said a 30 stock portfolio that's going to beat the market, because we started off looking at stronger stocks at that time. And then post demonetization, there was a fairly large, movement and all that stuff. The oldest strategy would be more than 5 years old as momentum goes. The strategy now is far more evolved than it used to be. It's not something where we just say, download some data, rank everything top to bottom, top 30 stocks. There's been blood that has, and sweat and tears that's gone into the strategy over the years. It's a strategy that's worked across asset classes. You could do this with commodities. There are people who do it with currencies, but I won't say we are a pioneer in this and we're the only guys doing this and all that stuff. It's just that I think Capitalmind has worked hard at making sure it's something that, and that just works over different market cycle, over a long term market cycle.
Makes sense. Perfect. Thank you. Last question before we end, which came from the audience, was, now that we have understood all of this, what should be the right deployment approach? One could be ki, lump sum dal do, one could be SIPs karo. For this strategy, is there like a preferred deployment, or it frankly doesn't matter? What would be your response to that?
First response is, hang on, don't invest. As in, at least not until you understand what it's about and you've got your expectations kind of, in place. Because I've seen this too many times where the strategy is done well for a few months and then people come in and invest and then they're surprised if it has a down month or it's trading the Nifty. Hey, I didn't expect this to happen. So one is, momentum is not meant to constantly outperform the Nifty or the market. It does not. Even in back tests, roughly on a 1 year trailing basis, 1/3 of the time it underperforms the Nifty. So think of it as one in 3 years, your 1 year returns will trail the Nifty. It's when you increase the time frame, when you take it to 3 year rolling returns and then 5 year rolling returns, is when your chances of outperforming grow up quite dramatically. That is one important point to sort of understand. The second is in terms of return expectations. Again, I've heard numbers like, 25% to aa jayega, and I've heard somebody doing a YouTube review of our momentum small case saying that you should expect roughly 8 or 9% per month. I'm like, what? I mean, I mean, how do I like, ban this video or something? It's like they're literally talking about our strategy and saying things we've never ever said. So the long-term equity average is 11 to 12%, right? So you should expect momentum, given it's active and all that, should look to outperform by, let's say, 4 or 5% on an annualized basis. That if that happens over, let's say, 15 years, I'd be very happy with the performance of momentum. But SIP versus lump sum doesn't matter as much if you have the conviction. In the sense, you understand the strategy, you understand the risk, because momentum takes a call of whether going fully or partially into cash based on what the data is telling us. Therefore, there is no advantage to doing an SIP in that sense, because if there aren't enough opportunities, what you put in as a lump sum, part of it will stay in cash for some time. It's really more about how you think and what you believe.
That's great, man. I think that's a very, very balanced answer. It also reflects, and I should say this because it deserves attention, that if you go to the Capitalmind Momentum Small Case page, unlike most small case pages, it actually starts with 2 links. One is 5 things to consider before subscribing to a small case, and 5 reasons or downsides of momentum investing, which is very clearly symbolic of what Anoop also meant, that it may not be for you, and that's totally okay, right? Agar aapka greed, aapka lalach gets the better of you, then frankly nothing will work. Ye conversation is zaruri nahi hai, aap casino mein jaake baith sakte hain. But if you genuinely want to get a grip over your money, your investing, and make it work for you, then you have to understand this. And if it works for you, then awesome. You will be blessed with hopefully a better return than what the index provides. Great. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen? This was very, very useful. I thoroughly enjoyed my time, but I would love to get anything from you, Deepak, Anoop, before we close.
Let me do one first and let Anoop take the closing after that. I think in general, momentum is this thing that I think runs a lot in our blood. It's the way we like it. We like batsman form mein us pe jao. And I think if one gets this philosophy and the fact that not everything is going to be roses all the way, there'll be some thorns along the way, then momentum is an interesting long-term strategy. And I say this long-term because people keep thinking, aap to stocks mein andar jaake bahar nikalte ho, so how is it long-term? The strategy is long-term. You can have a shop in which every shampoo is selling every day, but your shop is still making money. You're not going to hold on to a shampoo for the long term. I think that is how I think of momentum. And I'll leave you with the thought that if that is how an approach works for you, then it's useful to consider all the other caveats aside.
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate what I said in terms of making sure you're approaching it with the right set of expectations. One is, are your costs reasonable? Are you okay with being wrong? And are your expectations realistic? If you check all of those boxes, then maybe investing in something like a momentum might make sense for you. But whether it's momentum, whether it's quality, whether it's value, I think doing it with some understanding of what it's about and therefore what the downsides might be is absolutely critical to the investing process.
Perfect. Awesome. I hope to have a lot of conversations with small case managers, and I should tell you, you've set a very high bar, both of authenticity and clarity. So everyone else will look at this and say, boss, is level of clarity or authenticity se jana padega, varna we are not going up there. So thank you so much again. I loved the clarity that you provided me and my audience, and I'm sure it will benefit all. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Anoop. Thanks for your time and thanks for all the work that you do.
Thanks, Anoop. Thanks so much.
This was amazing. I benefited so much from this conversation. मुझे यकीन है कि आपको भी बहुत पसंद आया. अगर आप ऐसे conversations चाहते हैं जहां मैं finance experts को बुलाऊं, उनके साथ उनकी strategies के बारे में बात करूं, कैसे वो invest करते हैं, क्यों वो उनकी strategies है वो सब, then please let me know in the comment section, because then I will make the effort to bring all of these experts down to my YouTube channel for the benefit of all of you. This is Warikoo signing off. YouTube Shorts के लिए एक डेडिकेटेड चैनल लॉन्च किया गया है जिसपे आप सिर्फ वो 60 सेकंड के शॉर्ट्स देख सकते हैं. नो लॉन्ग फॉर्मेट कंटेंट टू कंफ्यूज यू एंड होपफुली those 60 seconds will help you just as much as these long format videos do. सब्सक्राइब करिए, पिन कमेंट और डिस्क्रिप्शन में लिंक है to the Warikoo Shorts channel.